We tend to think of inequality as a problem for poor people. But what if inequality was making us all poorer in ways that we can't even see? Welcome to Bonkers Economics. This is where we try to make sense of the broken British economy using images that I've created like this one. And this one's called A Life Cut Short. And it's probably the most shocking image in many ways in the Bonkers Economics series, at least in the series so far. And what it shows is the healthy life expectancy of somebody living in the wealthiest areas of the country compared to someone living in the most deprived areas of the country. And that difference is 20 years. So people living in the least deprived areas, they can expect to live 72 years before they encounter some sort of debilitating or terminal or long-term chronic illness. And for people in the poorest, in the most deprived areas of the country, they can expect to live for 52 years before encountering an illness of that sort. And that's a pretty shocking difference. And it does really define inequality in the UK in some ways. Because inequality is fundamentally about access to resources, it's about access to money, it's about access to services, for example, and that's what these measures of deprivation show. Should just say that we're talking about healthy life expectancy. Obviously, full life expectancy would be rather different. People will live about 8 or 9 years longer in terms of full life expectancy. So what that means in practice is a woman living in the wealthiest parts of the country can expect to live 72 years of healthy life, followed by a further 14 years, potentially, of chronic or long-term illness. And a woman living in the most deprived and the poorest areas of the country can expect to live 52 years, followed by 26 years of long-term chronic illness. And for men, although the healthy life expectancy figures are very similar, their total life expectancy figures are a bit lower because men tend to die a little bit younger than women. And as I said, this is pretty much a definition of inequality. It's hard to see it more clearly expressed. If you're looking for signs of inequality in our society, then here it is in this extraordinary 20-year difference in people's lives. Now, I realise, of course, that this raises a lot of questions. What do we mean by deprivation? Are people deprived, or are for some reason they're failing in their own lives? Are they failing to look after themselves? Are they not eating healthy diets? Are they smoking too much? Are they responsible in many ways for their own condition? Well, I think it's perfectly natural to ask these questions. We all take responsibility for our own lives. We know we have to work hard to get on and make progress. And it's not unreasonable that we expect everybody else to do the same. But I also think we need to be careful when we think about it in that way, because reality is that we're all fundamentally in the same boat. So if we don't feel motivated to try to improve the life prospects of the most deprived people in our society, then we may be missing out on the chance to improve our own life prospects too, because the two things are very closely interrelated. And that's because the economy is not a zero-sum game. It's not as if people are going to do worse because some other people do better, or people do better because other people do worse. The two things are not related in that way. If one person is doing better, that can lead to somebody else doing better too, because the economy is an integrated system of exchange and flow and interrelationship. So by doing what we can politically and socially to improve the situation of the worst off in society, we will effectively improve the situation for all. So how does that work? Well, it all comes down to money in the end. And the first thing to say about money is that money and wealth are not the same thing. So wealth is what contributes to the quality of our lives. We can measure it in terms of our health, our well-being, our security, our comfort, even our happiness and our relationships. They all contribute to our sense of wealth. And when we think of those things, we can see straight away they can't inevitably be bought with money. But on the other hand, without money, they're also very hard to achieve. So we can describe money as a sort of tool for creating wealth. It's an essential sort of input. But the wealth itself only arises when we do the work of wealth creation. That is to say, we use that money in a way which brings wealth into our lives. To get an image of this, think of a garden which needs water for things to grow. Think of money as the rain that falls on the garden. It's an essential input, but you still need to do the work yourself. If you're going to grow fruit or vegetables or flowers, you need to cultivate the soil, you need to look after it, you need to put in a lot of work. But if you don't have access to water, then no amount of work is going to do. And similarly, actually, if you have far too much water, if a flood comes and washes everything away, then that's no good either. The essential thing about rain in the garden is that you want the right amount of rain in the right place at the right time. And similarly, there's the right amount of money that the economy needs. There's the right amount of money that each person needs in the economy to be as productive as possible. And if we want the whole economy to work as effectively as possible, then we need to make sure that money is distributed in such a way that each person is able to produce as much wealth as they can. Now, we've all heard the phrase levelling up. In fact, we're probably a bit sick to death of it. It's really only a campaigning slogan, or at least that's how it started out. But like all such slogans, or many such slogans, it does contain a grain of truth. There is something in there which we could possibly get hold of. And that's actually in the word up, because there's something about levelling up which sort of makes sense in the context of how money is distributed through the economy. So let's compare that with the other phrase we've all heard a lot of over the last few decades, which is trickle down or trickle down economy. So that's the idea that by putting money in the top of the system, giving money to the richest people, then they will spend or invest that money wisely and it will trickle down to benefit everybody else. And as we know, it simply doesn't work. It hasn't worked and it's not going to work. And the main reason for that is that the money isn't spent. Wealthy people don't spend their money in the way that we think of as spending money. What they tend to do is to try to invest it. They try to buy assets and they try to buy resources and make a return on those assets and resources and accumulate even more money. Now, that doesn't help us at all because that just pushes up the value or the price of assets and makes them more expensive for the rest of us. That's why, for example, the housing market is so out of control. So that's not working because trickling down doesn't really happen. What happens is that the money is lent down, if you like, or borrowed down, and then paid back in greater quantities. So if trickle down doesn't work, then what about levelling up? Well, if trickle down involves putting money into the top of the economy and hoping it's going to find its way down to the bottom, then levelling up logically must involve putting money in at the bottom of the economy and allowing it to filter up slowly to everybody else. And what that means is that rather than relying upon money finding its way from the rich to the poor, the rich know that when they get rich, they're doing so on the basis that everybody who is poorer than them has got fundamentally enough to live off. They've got what they need to create wealth in their lives. So that's the principle. That is a solution that would go a long way to solving the terrible inequality, the terrible situation that this image reveals. But I guess it raises two questions. First of all, does it work? Is it for real? And secondly, if it is for real, what policy changes do we need to make it really happen? So how does this work in practice? Well, suppose you're a shopkeeper or a farmer or a furniture maker or a hairdresser. Well, you want people to buy your product, and people want to buy your products. And that's how the situation works. You create something or you do something and people pay you to do it, and you both benefit. So that's how wealth is created, through production and consumption. And it's really important to notice that we need both of those elements for wealth creation to happen. If you've got a pile of tables in your warehouse that you can't sell because nobody wants them or can afford them, then that's not wealth. It's not wealth you've created, it's just waste. And if you're hanging around in your hairdressing salon with your scissors at the ready and nobody comes in, then that's not wealth either. That's just a waste of your time. So wealth creation requires both production and consumption. And what's important to notice here is that both those activities require access to money. You clearly can't buy things without money, but you also can't produce them without money either, because you need money to live while you do the production. You need money for a workshop, you need money for tools, you need money for all sorts of things which allow you to be productive. So money is an essential input both to the productive process and to the consumption process. And that's why money is the sort of oil, if you like, in the works, or the water in the garden, as we said, which allows the whole thing to happen. And getting money into the right place at the right time in the way that will allow maximum activity of that sort to happen is what allows the economy to thrive and to grow. So now we can see why putting money in the bottom of the economy, giving money to the poorest people in society, is a very effective way of causing the economy to grow. Because suddenly you've got people who can spend money to buy things, and that makes them better off, that improves their quality of life, and that also allows the people who produce things to produce more and to spend more themselves and to improve the quality of their lives. And that just carries on up the chain. People who are producing furniture may need to buy new equipment, for example, and that puts money into the hands of equipment makers, and so it goes on. The point is that the more activity you can create in the economy and the more positive outcomes that produces, the wealthier we all get. And that's wealthy in the broadest possible sense. It doesn't just mean wealthy in the material sense. It may allow some of us to have more time off, for example. It may allow all sorts of things. It may allow a situation in which we can improve our relationships because we're not working so hard, or we're sleeping better. There are all sorts of ways in which our quality of life can be increased because we have more access to wealth. So this is a sort of virtuous circle where you put money in at the bottom and it just continues to circulate. It gradually works its way up through the system. It improves life quality for everybody. Whereas the alternative to that, of putting money into the top of the system, it just doesn't have that effect because the money doesn't find its way down to where it's needed. It will continue to keep coming back up to the top because the people at the bottom don't and never will have on that system enough to generate the wealth that can kickstart the whole process. So I'm aware this is a very simple explanation of how the economy works. But I think it's worth saying that the economy is really very simple. It's not as complicated as people would like us to believe, because economics is essentially about production and consumption and how we can make those two things happen in the most organized and efficient way. And really money is just, as I said earlier, the oil in the engine or the water on the garden. The money just helps to make that happen. Money is very, very useful in that respect. But if we get to the point of thinking that money is the outcome of the economy, in other words, the purpose of the economy is to produce money, so to speak, then we've got it all completely wrong. And that's why it's not going to work. And I think that's sort of where we're heading at the moment, because what we really mean when we say economics is really complicated and we don't understand it, what we really mean is finance is really complicated and we don't understand it. And finance, although it's supposed to be helpful, actually gets massively in the way of simple economics. Finance is mostly about using money that you've got to extract more money, using money to extract money from the people who are producing real things. And so finance massively complicates the whole situation. But it's not economics. Finance is a completely different branch of activity. So finance is not wealth creation. Finance is a cost on the process of wealth creation. And in many ways, as little finance activity as possible in the economy would be a much better thing. And okay, that's a massive rabbit hole we could go down because there's so much to say about the effects of the financialisation of the British economy. And there will be, and there already are, other bonkers economics videos about that. For the moment, we just need to concentrate on the fact that money is a tool for creating wealth, that we need to get that money into the most efficient places, and that generally speaking, the most efficient places for money to create wealth is in the hands of people who don't have enough money to create wealth in their lives, because they can really add something, they can really use the money. And if they use the money, then that will benefit all of us further up the chain. So with that in mind, that leads us to the second question, which is what can the government do to achieve this? What are the actual steps that can be taken to make this thing happen? Well, this also is potentially an enormous subject. We're sort of so stuck in the neoliberal framing of how the economy works. We're so stuck in a sort of free market framing that we can't imagine doing things in a different way. It's very hard to imagine the government really taking this on and challenging the status quo, finding a different way of managing the economy that would be more beneficial for everybody. And that's something we're going to get into more and more in Bonkers Economics. We need to unpack this. There's a lot of complication in there, of course. But there's also something very simple, which is that all money originates with the government. And the government has an unbelievable amount of control over where that money goes. Because money either originates through government spending, and then it gets taken out again through taxation and borrowing and that sort of thing, or it gets in because the government allows the banks to create money by lending money they don't have. In either case, the government is in control. The government can decide how money enters the system, where it goes, and to a large extent what it is used for. And although we wouldn't want the government taking too much interest in those questions, we want the government to take enough interest to ensure that the money goes to places where it's needed and where it can be most useful. And bear in mind that this current government is on and on and on about growth, 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 and that all it wants to see is growth in the economy. You would think it would be a no-brainer for them to try to work out, well, where in the economy can we put this money where it's going to maximize the amount of real economic growth and not just get lost in assets and higher house prices and offshore bank accounts and increasing wealth for a small number of people at the very top. So why isn't the government doing this? Why isn't it trying to get money into the bottom of the system? Why is it still pouring in at the top? And the answer to that is that it's not really measuring the economy in the right way. So, for example, if your landlord puts your rent up by £100, well, that's just a direct transfer of money from you to them. So you're £100 poorer and they're £100 richer. And what you're doing, your house, that's just the same. So nothing's being created. You're not wealthier in any way. But if you spend £100 more on food, well, then that money is going to benefit you because you've got better food or more food if you didn't have enough. And the shopkeeper's got some of your money and the producer and the farmer have got some of your money, and that allows them to do more things to improve the quality of their lives too. So obviously there's a huge difference between those two sorts of spending. But from the government point of view, there's no difference at all. They're both spending. They're both measured, therefore, as GDP. They're both measured as economic activity. So that sort of measurement or that difference in those two sorts of spending is not in any way informing government policy. But it certainly could. So if the government measured differently, if the government decided it was only going to measure productive activity in the economy, it was only going to measure production and consumption of real things that make people's lives better, and it wasn't going to measure extractive activities such as rent or trading profits and that sort of thing, wasn't going to measure those as being productive activity, then of course a whole new set of policy priorities would come into place. If the government wanted to grow the economy, it couldn't just put money in at the top because that's where all these extractive activities take place. It would have to put money in at the bottom because that's where the real economic production is happening. So it's a simple change. It's a change that doesn't cost anything. No tax has to be raised to make this change happen, and yet it would transform the way the government thinks about policy. It would transform economic outcomes because everybody would be focused now on producing real wealth in the economy. And there'd be no incentive to encourage banks to lend to traders, no incentive to push up house prices. There'd be no incentive to increase the value of assets. There'd be no incentive to make things just more expensive for everybody because the incentive would all be about creating real wealth. Real wealth, whether it's produced using money or not, because there's so much we can also do in our lives to produce wealth that doesn't involve spending money or only partly involves spending money because we do a lot of work for ourselves. So there's a whole new way of looking at this, and that's what we need to encourage the government to do if we want to solve this problem. Because only if we get to the point where we value the sort of economic activity that these people can do, and we put money in their direction so that they can create wealth in their own lives, only then can this great gap in the circle be filled. This circle can grow into a continuous circle, and it will be just as big as this circle. It doesn't have to be smaller, because there's no reason why people have to get poorer, because some people who are already poor are able to become better off. That's just not how the economy works when it's working properly. The point about economic growth is that it spreads through the economy and it's beneficial for all. So there we go. As I say, loads more to be said about all of this. Loads more episodes of Bonkers Economics coming along to explain it in more detail. For the moment, if you've enjoyed this video, please do press the like button down below because that's really, really helpful to get the word out. Please also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and thank you if you have. And please do tell your friends, tell your family, tell anybody who might be interested. And please also do check out the website, which is bonkerseconomics.net. There you will find the background to all these images. You'll find the numbers behind them. You'll find the sources of those numbers. There's plenty of information there, and it's an opportunity to get behind the image and understand a bit more closely exactly what's going on. Thanks very much. Look forward to speaking to you next time.